It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce Steve Alexander, the president of the Association of Plastic Recyclers. And if you ever attended an APR meeting and you look around the conference room, you can see every single major brand, every single major retailer. And if you're smart, label converters and label suppliers, because there is nobody, in my opinion, there is nobody that is changing the game in the label industry more than the Association of Plastic Recyclers. So get out your notebooks, take some notes, because this is the man.
Where's the... who are you talking about? Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. The restrooms, by the way, are just down the hall there, just in case you needed to know that. I just found that out, so that's really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I just want to tell you that at the end of my presentation, we're going to talk about things specifically to your industry relative to plastics recycling, plastics reclamation, and the work that we're doing to help you work with your customers so that they can meet their sustainability commitments. Because frankly, you're part of the solution to plastics packaging sustainability. Plastics are always going to be around. Plastic containers are always going to be around. We're never going to ban our way out of this. What we're going to be able to do is we're going to change our design. We're going to be able to change the products we offer to allow those materials to be sustainable in the long run. And then you're a critical part of that as we go forward. You know, one of the things we like to say, and excuse me for a second, but I'm having a real problem because I've got a board member here and another board member sitting back there, and they write my check, and so now I'm very nervous. So, any event, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about who APR is, what we do generally, what we think the big issues are relative to plastics packaging sustainability. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the label industry. And I'm happy to stick around later, and also Roz has got me coming back tomorrow to do this again at 10 a.m. tomorrow. If you want to catch me tomorrow morning as well, I'll be here in advance. I do want to say one thing before I get started. For those of you who were here at 1 o'clock, APR is firmly convinced that the U.S. Plastic Pact, with Emily Tapaldo, who's sitting there, right there, the CEO of the Plastic Pact, they are the key driver in change in pushing brands to meet their sustainability guidelines. They've made a lot of promises. She's the one that's holding their feet to the fire and creating pathway for them to meet those. We are a huge proponent of the pact. If you weren't here and you're a TLMI member, I know the presentation will be online at some point, but she's sitting right there. Raise your hand. Go ahead. She's right there, right? And so if you want, you need to talk to her about what they're doing. All right, enough of the introduction. So let's go. So facts matter. Let's be honest. And in this arena, we play with a lot of non-facts. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk a little bit about what really is happening in terms of plastics packaging and plastics recyclability. So this is who we are. If you don't know us, we're international. We like to say we're the voice of plastics recycling. We play in all areas of the arena. We're, at our soul, we're a technical organization. We'll go through that. But we're also an advocacy organization. We're a member services organization. We're a training organization. Nobody else works on plastics recycling each and every day. That's all they do. A lot of other groups out there, this is part of what they do. Trust me. This is all we do, and we've always been doing since 1990. We are the authors of one of the most widely referenced design guidelines across the globe, the APR Design Guide for Plastics Recyclability. You want your package to be compatible with recycling? That's the pathway to do it. The U.S. Plastic Pact follows the APR Design Guide. It's pretty much global across the way. Recyclass in Europe and us, we work very, very closely together. There are a couple of minor differences if you do a lot of work globally with Recyclass, mostly dealing with the collection infrastructure, not with the technical components of what you need to do to ensure your product is designed to be recyclable. We have a training program for that. We will go to your customer and we will customize a training program to help your customer understand what changes do they need to make in their packaging in order to ensure it's designed to be compatible with recycling. We have test methods. So there are some of you in the room, and we'll talk about that have passed our testing protocol. We're the only place you can go to test your product to determine whether or not it's compatible with recycling. We do training, communication, advocacy, some other stuff. One of the key things that I'm mostly proud of is for this industry to be successful, we must ensure that the recycled content that is being utilized is post-consumer content. The issue we have with plastics packaging are the containers that your customers are using are not packaging that is business to business. It's not post-industrial material. It's the material and the containers and the products that your customers and consumers see, touch, and feel every day. That's where the plastics packaging crisis is coming from. It's not coming from Millbrook or plant scrap that is being recycled internally. And what's incredibly important, when brands are making their commitments that they're using recycled content, if they're not using certified post-consumer content, they're only contributing to the problem, because they're still putting products out there that are not completely recyclable, have some content in it, but it's not capturing, pulling back the material that we need to take out of the waste stream. So they're contributing to the problem, they're not helping it. Consumer product companies, your customers, must understand they are the feedstock for their remanufacturing material. You talk about the circular economy. We talk about circularity. In graduate school a long time ago, we had something called garbage in, garbage out. If you're contaminating the very stream of material you're asking us to create certified content from, you're not helping at all. So they have to understand that when the way they design their product ultimately, more than anything else, impacts the recyclability of that product. Think about it. If the product isn't designed to be recyclable, it doesn't matter if the consumer puts it in the bin, it doesn't matter if it sorts properly, it doesn't matter if it can be processed appropriately, it's a contaminant in the stream. And so brands must understand design is absolutely critical in order to solve this issue going forward. Let's talk a little bit about the markets out there. Obviously, if we're here today, we know that we're facing an uphill battle. The narrative around the products that we all deal with every single day is draconian. So what we try and do is bring a little facts to the table and talk about solutions which don't always necessarily arise from the legislative or regulatory process. We try and be a technical advisor to legislators and regulators. Let's just say that apparently there are people out there that think they know better than the people who deal with this stuff every day, between you and us. Here's one misconception: only 8% of plastics are recyclable. That includes all plastics that is produced out there in the denominator. That's not where our problem is. Our problem is with consumer packaging. When they take a metric of other materials out there, they typically focus on consumer packaging. They don't use all material. They use industrial material, durable material, whatever, in the denominator. That's a misleading statistic. Here's where we like to go. 80% of consumer plastic packaging is derived from 3 resins: PET, high density, and polypropylene. You know what? We know how to recycle those. We're pretty damn good at it. Today, we're recycling, that's not, we corrected that number, it's 19.8% of those 3 resins are recycled today. That's a pretty lousy number, but it sure as hell is an 8%. And oh, by the way, the recycling industry has the capacity today, at 3 o'clock Central Time, Chicago, Illinois, September 13th, to recycle 42%. We can get that rate to 42% today. We have the capacity. We don't have the supply. The regulators and the other folks out there in the marketplace are asking us to create content out of thin air. So we need more supply. You're going to hear me say, and I've said this a couple of times, basically there are 5 components to recycling a product. You have to design it right. It's got to be put in the bin. That's your supply component. It's got to separate properly. APR has developed the sortation potential protocol, which will tell you whether or not your container or product will sort with its kin in the proper stream. And by the way, we've done that. We've created it's for all material, including 2D, 3D. Never been done before. So we have the sortation protocol. We have the processing capability, and with Emily's help, we've created the market demand. 4 of those 5, we've been able to have a major impact on and continue to work on that. What can't we control? We can't control the supply. That's a government program. We have to make sure that we get more material into the stream. There are 9,000 recycling programs in this country. Every one of them takes something different, essentially. So our argument is that why don't we start with making sure that every program in the country collects what we know 80% of the consumer packaging is. And while we're doing that, and we take all that material out of the stream, and we create much more economic viability in the stream, then let's focus on, while we're solving that issue, then let's work on film and flexible over here. Let's create a collection program for film and flexible material, the fastest growing material in the marketplace. Tremendous amount of volume out there. How do we collect that material, and then how can we recycle it? We know how to recycle it, you just can't collect that through the normal stream. You guys all know that. We put this report out 2 weeks ago, excuse me, in response to some of the negative publicity that came out. There was an Atlantic article, there was a Wall Street Journal article. You're seeing this negative activity coming out there. We've engaged in a pushback, if you will, from a media standpoint. It's on our website, plasticsrecycling.org. Anybody can download it. We've published it. It's been picked up in a lot of the press. But we need to start telling our story better, and we're going to be doing that. I'll bore you with a little bit of data, but what it really shows is in 2020, during the height of the pandemic, you may not know this, but the plastics recycling industry recycled 5 billion pounds of material. That's a pretty good number. You had supply chain disruptions, you had communities dropping recycling components of their program, if not their program entirely, and we still pulled out 5 billion pounds. Obviously, it's still a decrease a little bit from 2019, but really not that big a decrease at all. And you can get all this. We publish a recycling rate report every year, so you can get all this online in our resources section of our website. Emily pointed out, and I thought it was a phenomenal chart. I've never seen that chart before. How much PET bottles represent in the stream of material that's out there. And here's something you probably want to know. Label contamination makes up 85% of the contamination with a PET container. So if we can solve the label issue, we reduce contamination of PET containers dramatically. So think about that when you go to our design guide. So these were the recycling rates, and it's what I like to point out. So in California, you're not going to be able to buy a car produced by fossil fuels in 2035. So they're giving that industry 12, 13 years to ramp up. They're requiring 25, 35, 50% recycling rates for containers by 2025. Why are we so different that it's not recognized that we're an industry that needs to change our manufacturing philosophy, our collection infrastructure? These three rates right here, you could argue with deposit legislation and what have you, that PET and high density have been government mandated containers to be collected since the late 80s. And we're at 27 and 28%. But somehow we're supposed to get to 50% in a very short period of time, which shows you that the recognition does not exist, that essentially our waste management system today is the same as it's been for the last 50 years. And asking a PET thermoform with a nice label on it to meet a 25% recycled content rate in the next 2 years is like asking your 1978 Chevrolet Chevette to meet current California emission standards. The industry infrastructure must be given time to adapt, and we have to stop confusing it. So what can we do? I talked to all these. These are obviously the keys going forward. I talked a little bit about the design guide, and again, I can't harp on this enough. It's all over our website. We will work with you. We will customize the program with you. We've worked with many of you in the audience. We'll get to that a little bit later on revolutionizing, frankly, some washable labels, other types of precious labels, certain types of inks, etc. It's all key, and it's all part of our design. We do have the training program. The other thing is, this industry is not a waste industry. We're the Silicon Valley, from a technological standpoint, of the waste management. By that I mean, you all are making changes in technology, the way you handle with the label stocks and the inks and whatever every day, washable inks, whatever. But NIR sortation's only been around for about 8 to 10 years of any scale, right? Artificial intelligence is going to change the way we separate materials. Our potential protocol, that's supposed to be black plastics sortation, okay? So we're just about at the cusp of solving the black plastic sortation issue, because when we got NIR, it's just like one step forward and 12 steps back. We got NIR sortation, guess what happened? We no longer manually sort. The NIR could not see the black containers on the black belts. We've solved that now, pretty much. We're close. I talked about PCR certification. APR has the most stringent PCR certification program that exists. You have to maintain a minimum of 90% post-consumer material in your feedstock to meet our certification program. You're never going to get 100% certified material. It doesn't exist. The way the system works, the way material flows, you might get 95, but there's always a mix. You got polypropylene, you got high density, there's some mix there, whatever. Now, I talked earlier about post-industrial material. Just remember, post-consumer material, the utilization of post-consumer material is the only way that we're going to solve the plastic sustainability problem we have today, because when you use post-industrial material as content, you're not dealing with the issue at hand. It's a side swipe. This is just our program that we open up. It's compliant with the state of California, which is a big deal. If you use our Pcr certification program, other certification programs are not legally compliant with California. We don't get a fee. We're certified, but we have 4 auditors who are certified across the board. It's open to all reclaimers globally, not just APR members. Right now we have 15 suppliers who are certified for PCR resin into multiple resins in certain areas. In high density, we represent about 50% of the volume in the marketplace. In PET, we're about 40%. In polypropylene, we're probably over 50% today, and that's growing every day. The other thing, a message that I don't understand that a lot of brand companies don't use when they talk about what you do use for the recyclability of the products that you're selling to them. It takes, essentially, you reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and your energy utilization by almost 87% if you use recycled content in your products. And you think about that for a second, because the other thing that you know is that if you recycle plastic, the ROI on recycling a plastic container is greater from a monetary investment. You get the greatest ROI for reducing carbon footprints and greenhouse gas emissions for your dollar, for your bang for your buck, than any other material that you use out there. And it is something that a consumer can physically participate in to reduce their own carbon footprint and help with climate change. It's a physical connection to the program rather than leaving it off to some regulated program. All this, again, is on our website. We do a lot of market development stuff. We talk a lot about expanding the paradigm for what people can utilize their materials, how you can use more material in different applications. We obviously do a lot with FDA L&Os. That might be of interest to a lot of you. But this is just a little demonstration project we did last year. And just by working with a small number of companies, we were able to create a market just last year of about 140 million pounds of new demand for plastics by getting people to do things like changing from wood pallets to plastic pallets, which last for 12 years versus 8 months. Those sorts of activities. We have laundromats that we're now using plastic components with recycled content rather than using other materials. We have chemical manufacturers using dunnage crates and slip sheets and plastic pallets, which consume a tremendous amount of material. So it's all about changing the paradigm. It's not necessarily about that number, the 138. It's more about changing your paradigm to set up the system to recycle more material somewhere down the line. Move through that. So the big issue obviously is design, but what we need today is we need more material. There's simply no way people are going to meet their sustainability commitments, the commitments that Emily has put out there by 2025, unless we significantly increase the amount of supply available for reclamation. You know, in California, there's a PCR requirement for beverage containers by 2025, and when they were putting that legislation together 3 years ago, we told them to meet that commitment by 2025 of 25%, we might be able to get you to 24.8% with the amount of material you collect today. But when you want to get to 35% or 50% by 2030, you need to collect 4 times the amount of PET containers that you're collecting today. We just can't make this stuff up. I mean, you know, we need the physical supply. And that was before California's collection program imploded a couple of years ago. So when someone says to me, well, what do you propose from a policy standpoint? Our design program, we're huge proponents of streamlining labeling. We work with the FTC right now to try and get the FTC to update their green guides, because right now you can essentially say anything you want on a product in terms of its recyclability, and you're pretty much legal. And so we think that labeling, clearing up labeling, could be one of the most significant steps to cleaning up the issue we have right now, with reducing contamination and also reducing confusion over consumers, because all of us ask the question every day, is this recyclable? Does this go into my bin? All of us. There's no question about it. We have to increase the number of community programs. Like I said, we have 9,000, but guess what? They all collect different things. We need more consistency across the board. We want to harmonize the types of plastics that are included in the bin. All these things are simple things. Just make sure everybody collects the same thing. We want to do a lot more investment in our waste management and our waste collection system. Obviously, we want to promote recycled content. And then people need to understand the true cost of disposal, because this is a business and it costs a lot of money to run it. So what I want to do is just take a couple of seconds to focus on how we've been able to work with the label industry over the past year. Many companies that are here have gone through our critical guidance recognition program. That's our testing program, our form of approval for labels and inks and additives. These are just some of them that you see out there today, more on our website. These are the big issues. When you talk about the impact of labels on recycling containers, okay? They shouldn't interfere with NIR. Metal can be a big impact, right, Christy? You know, polypropylene and high density containers, they're different than PET containers. They recycle different. You wash them different, you grind them different. Obviously label requirements for PET are the most demanding. There's no doubt about it. High density and PET and polypropylene containers are much more forgiving. And of course, a lot of reclaimers do saleable side streams with label removal. We're publishing new guidelines for labels on mixed colored containers for high density and for PET. These labels will now be part of a new program that we have called Meets Preferred Guidance. So when you do critical guidance testing, it's a fairly elaborate testing with a testing lab. There's two ones that we work with by and large. One we work with a great deal. But there's a new program called Meets Preferred Guidance. So if you've created essentially a copycat product in the marketplace, you don't necessarily go through the entire testing apparatus. You just present that data, and we compare it versus basically the baseline, and that's going to be our Meets Preferred Guidance. These are recognitions that you have in a written form, which you can present to your customer if they want to know: do you meet APR guidance? Do you follow APR guidance? That's that. And that's that. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Steve?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your leadership at the APR. As a member, I can say it's and I'm not saying it just to make your head any bigger, but it's the gold standard of industries. And so my question.
First of all, is that why you blew me off for dinner?
Oh, it's because my CEO needed to have me
okay,
at dinner.
right,
Sorry.
Okay, priorities. Okay.
You didn't talk about, and I know you could talk for hours on this type of subject, but as you know, supply chain challenges have just crushed everybody. But I want to talk about paper a little bit. Paper being detrimental to what we sell to
Yep.
our customers,
Yep.
and I know our industry, we can do a better job of trying to not sell paper, but there are just some brands that, nope, I want the cheapest, I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, can you make some commentary around, paper and obviously the APRs about plastics, but just give a little insight further.
Well, paper labels are the bane of our existence. APR has, in our design platform, there's 3 standards. Either you're APR preferred, or then you're preferred with a detrimental feature, or you're not recyclable. Now the PACT is APR preferred. So if you meet APR preferred, you meet all the PACT's guidelines, essentially, for all the problematic and unnecessary materials. Is that right, Em? Is that correct? Okay. And the reality is, we hate paper labels. It's like getting a medical procedure we don't want. We deal with it. We prefer not to deal with it. Each recycler deals with it in their own different, unique way. It's a very private industry. We need to move away from plastic labels because it's a huge contaminant in the marketplace. We need to incentivize somehow the brand companies and require them to make that change. One of the real problems we have is there's a labeling program out there that gives a widely recycled label to a container with a paper label. Once the brand gets that label, they don't care if they've got a detrimental feature, okay? This is the How to Recycle label from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. We've tried to work with them to say, look, at a minimum, can you give somebody, if you insist on giving somebody widely recycled with a detrimental feature, could you please make it time restrictive and say, we'll give you widely recycled, but you got 3 years to change and remove the detrimental feature, otherwise we're going to remove your widely recycled designation. They seem to be the ones with a lot of power over the brands on this. We're getting much more vocal on that point, by the way. I'm about to publish a paper, a blog, or I don't know what you call it, a white paper on paper labels and the impact on paper labels on this market. You know, we're all here today dealing with a problem that somebody else creates. And, you know, when Emily mentioned earlier that Coca-Cola just changed their Sprite bottle in green to a clear PET because it helped them get more material for their recycled content to meet their goals. And they wanted a big quote from me applauding them. And I said, all this proves is you have the power to make the changes to make your product more recyclable every single day. Why should you get applauded for something you should be doing? I mean, this is what they should be doing, right? I'm not the most popular, just so you know, brands hate me. I'm just, in case you're not understanding that. So, but I think that, you know, that's a great example, Tim, of the conundrum. Because, and we've had this issue because people have worked with us to create floatable labels, to create other types of labels, and yet you invest the R&D, and yet you can't get an ROI because you can't commercialize it. And so who do they listen to? Who are the brands going to listen to? Now hopefully this legislation, such as like extended producer responsibility and the labeling requirements in California, Oregon, Washington, now Colorado, those things are going to push brands, hopefully, with some sort of regulatory requirement going forward. But it's an ongoing battle, and it's one of our top 5 priorities to deal with that.
Other questions? Steve, can you say a little bit about, you know, the EPR legislation that you just mentioned, but also the California SB 343, SB 54, what impact you predict that will have on other states perhaps, and certainly on brands?
Well, we've been actively involved in all that. I came out of that arena. The short answer, and it's not a blip answer, is we don't know. Because you never know what the regulations are going to be. For instance, SB 54 in California is an exhaustive, extensive piece of legislation. It's going to require them to create data that has never been created before, and then make regulations on that data within like 18 months. Data we've been trying to collect for 40 years. And they gave them no additional funding to go out and do that. So I think that's an issue. You want to say something? Go ahead. Go ahead. You don't.
Are you finished?
No, go ahead. You're the boss.
No, the only thing I was going to add is it's going to get really interesting over the next couple of years because, like, just using the example of SB 54, there will be extended producer fees on all of the packaging sold into California.
Yep.
And so right now, I think there's a game going on where a lot of CPG companies in particular know what kinds of changes they need to make. And it's like, well, do we jump in now when maybe the ROI is a couple of years out because we know it's the right thing to do, or do we wait and get slapped with EPR fees?
Right.
Because the the price is going to get ratcheted up one way or another. It's just kind of a matter of when folks are willing to do it. And I think that's one of the things about the Plastics Pact is like, get ahead, do it now, do it before your competitors do it in a way that fits in with your manufacturing stream before California or Colorado or whomever it is telling you exactly how you have to do it. So it's kind of a game of chicken at this point.
Well, thank you for that. I think the way that I would use the analogy is we don't know. I would say, if you use a football analogy, you're sort of like on the 20-yard line of your own 20-yard line. You've got 80 yards to go. Because I can guarantee you the regulators have no idea how to create regulation around this. They're coming to us. We talk to Cal Recycle, the EPA, every week. The regulators are going to struggle. Same thing in Oregon, same thing in Washington, same thing in Colorado. There isn't a lot of intellectual property at the regulatory perspective around these sorts of legislation. I am concerned that the ultimate thing that we want is supply. And I'm not convinced that EPR generates supply. It generates fees that goes to some type of organization that's supposed to handle those fees and then distribute them to create recycling infrastructure. But at the end of the day, we all need supply of materials. So how do you do that? And I do think, to the extent that there is a template now out there, it wasn't Maine, it's not going to be California. I think if you think about these things, I think Colorado is probably going to be the template that's just been passed, and we're going to be following that very closely in terms of the implementation of that. The other issue you've got from a legislative standpoint, from a labeling standpoint, you got, California saying you can't use the chasing arrows, Oregon saying, well, you can use chasing arrows for a couple of years, but you got to have something else, whatever. That's not done yet. I mean, there are people who are thinking about a lawsuit against that because essentially you got one state right now that is operating in opposition to 38 other states in terms of a resident identification code. So how do you deal with that? So, I'd say check back in a year and we'll have a much better idea of what this is going to be like. But it's a mess. I don't, I'll say that.
Any other questions? All right, please join me in giving Steve a big hand for being here. Appreciate it.